How to conduct literature review. Good day, everyone. In this presentation, I will explain how to conduct a literature review effectively. A literature review is one of the most important components of any research project because it helps researchers understand existing knowledge, identify gaps in the literature, and justify the need for their study. We will go through a step-by-step process, from defining the review scope to building a strong narrative that leads to a research gap.
What is a literature review and why does it matter? A literature review is much more than a collection of article summaries. It is a critical and synthesized analysis of previous research related to a specific topic. Through a literature review, researchers establish the academic context of their study, demonstrate their understanding of the field, justify why their research is needed, and position their work within existing scholarly discussions. A well-written literature review shows that the researcher understands both what is known and what remains unknown. The six-step process at a glance. Conducting a literature review involves 6 major steps. First, define the scope of the review. Second, search for relevant literature using academic databases. Third, select studies that meet your inclusion criteria. Fourth, organize the literature systematically. Fifth, compare and analyze the studies critically. Finally, build a coherent narrative that leads readers to the research gap your study intends to address. Step 1. Define your review scope. Before beginning any literature search, it is important to clearly define the scope of the review. Researchers should identify the central research question they want to explore and determine the key concepts involved. They should also establish clear boundaries, including the population, geographical context, discipline, publication types, and time period to be covered. A focused scope helps prevent information overload and keeps the review manageable and relevant. Example, research question: how does social media influence online purchase intention among Gen Z consumers? Scope: Gen Z, social media marketing, online shopping, studies from 2020 to 2026. Step 2. Search for literature using databases. Once the scope is defined, the next step is searching for literature. Researchers can use databases such as Google Scholar, PubMed, JSTOR, Scopus, Web of Science, ERIC, and PsycInfo, depending on their field of study. Effective searching requires the use of Boolean operators such as AND, OR, and NOT, as well as synonyms, related terms, and truncation symbols. Researchers should also examine reference lists from key articles to discover additional relevant studies. Keeping a record of search terms is essential for transparency and reproducibility. Example: search Google Scholar and Scopus using keywords social media marketing and purchase intention and Gen Z. Step 3. Select high-quality and relevant studies. Not every article found during a search should be included in the literature review. Researchers need clear inclusion and exclusion criteria. Inclusion criteria may include peer-reviewed publications, studies within a specific date range, direct relevance to the topic, and strong methodological quality. Exclusion criteria may include outdated studies, non-peer-reviewed sources, duplicate findings, or articles that are only loosely related to the research question. Reference management software can help organize selected studies efficiently. Example: include peer-reviewed journal articles from 2020 to 2026, focusing on Gen Z and online purchasing. Exclude studies on traditional advertising or older generations. Step 4. Organize the literature. After selecting relevant studies, researchers should organize them in a meaningful way. One common approach is organizing by theme, where studies are grouped according to recurring topics. Another approach is organizing by theory, which clusters studies using similar theoretical frameworks. Researchers may also organize by methodology, separating quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method studies. Alternatively, organizing chronologically can show how knowledge in the field has developed over time. Example: Theme 1, social media advertising. Theme 2, influencer marketing. Theme 3, electronic word of mouth, EWOM. Theme 4, purchase intention. Step 5, compare and analyze studies. This stage transforms the literature review from a descriptive exercise into an analytical one. Researchers should identify areas where studies agree and establish consensus findings. They should also examine contradictions and inconsistencies in results. Furthermore, it is important to evaluate the strengths and contributions of existing studies while recognizing their limitations. Through comparison and analysis, researchers can identify areas that require further investigation. Example: study A found influencer credibility increases purchase intention. Study B found social media entertainment is more important than credibility. Compare similarities and differences. Step 6. Build a narrative toward the gap. A literature review should tell a logical and coherent story. It begins by introducing key concepts, theories, and established findings. Next, it explores methodological patterns, debates, contradictions, and limitations within the literature. Finally, it leads naturally to the identification of a research gap. The research gap should appear as the logical conclusion of the review, rather than being introduced suddenly at the end. Example: most studies focus on Instagram and TikTok separately. Few studies examine multiple platforms together among Malaysian Gen Z consumers. Therefore, a research gap exists. What to include in your review? A strong literature review should include definitions of key concepts, discussion of relevant theories, summaries of empirical findings, methodological trends, unresolved issues, and the identified research gap. A typical structure starts by defining major concepts, then discussing relationships among variables, presenting theoretical frameworks, reviewing empirical evidence, and concluding with the justification for the proposed study. Example: concept. Social media has become an important marketing channel influencing consumer behavior. What previous studies found? Smith, 2023, found that influencer credibility positively affects purchase intention. Lee, 2024, found that entertainment content has a stronger effect than credibility. Limitation. Most studies were conducted in the United States and focused on a single platform. Research gap. Limited studies have examined the combined influence of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube on Malaysian Gen Z consumers. Research objective. To examine the influence of social media marketing factors on online purchase intention among Malaysian Gen Z consumers. This is the exact flow usually expect: topic to literature, search to themes to comparison to limitation, to research gap to research objectives. Common mistakes to avoid. Several common mistakes can weaken a literature review. One mistake is treating the review as an annotated bibliography by summarizing articles one by one without making connections. Another mistake is relying on outdated or irrelevant sources. Researchers should also avoid presenting information without analysis or synthesis. Finally, every section of the review should be connected to the research question and demonstrate how the proposed study contributes to existing knowledge. Key takeaways. In conclusion, conducting a literature review requires careful planning and systematic execution. Researchers should define their scope clearly, search for literature systematically, apply inclusion and exclusion criteria consistently, organize studies strategically, and critically analyze findings. Most importantly, the literature review should guide readers toward a clearly justified research gap. A well-conducted literature review forms the foundation of a strong and meaningful research project.
How to conduct